Hi friends, good morning and welcome to Rhythm on YouTube. I'm really glad you're here as we together start a new message series called Trash Talker. Welcome to Rhythm. Friends, I want to share something with you that is very special to me. It's this brick. This brick typically lives in my office on my bookshelf next to my John Stockton action figures because this brick was a gift. It was a gift from two former interns, Madison Peoples and Caleb Kirshner. Now, there's a little bit of a story behind this brick. Typically on a normal youth group Sunday, Caleb and I would hang out a little bit after youth group and we would shoot basketball together and maybe engage in a little bit of trash talk. Now, trash talk is different from toxic talk. Toxic talk, like you're intentionally trying to hurt someone. Trash talk, you're just sort of boasting back and forth with humor and hyperbole, exaggeration. You're just having fun. And so frequently, Caleb and I would critique each other's jump shot, and this brick immortalized that critique, that trash talk, because Madison and Caleb were kind enough to write on this brick Jason's jump shot. Trash talk exists at the intersection of conflict and conversation. And because there is so much conflict in Scripture and so much conversation in Scripture, there is plenty of trash talk. There's plenty of back and forth boasting. There's plenty of tit for tat taunting. There is plenty of quarrels with quotes. There is trash talk between Jesus and the Pharisees. There is trash talk between David and Goliath. There is trash talk all throughout Scripture. And maybe one of the best examples of trash talk and a book of Scripture that is full of conversation is the book of Job. Now, it's in the Old Testament, so it's a little bit different from the context that we find ourselves in. It's spelled like Job, but pronounced Job. And in the book of Job, there are all kinds of conflict and conversation. There is conflict and conversation between God himself and the devil. There is conflict and conversation between Job and his friends. There is conflict and conversation between Job and his wife. There is conflict and conversation between Job and God. And listen, it's a big book, and it's kind of a different book than maybe what we typically read in the New Testament. And I am certainly not going to do the entirety of the book justice in this particular moment. But what I want to do is give you some context and then take you to the end and this particular conversation between Job and God to show you what that conversation, what that trash talk reveals about who God is. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The beginning of the book, there's this strange scene where God and Satan, God and the devil, are having a conversation. And basically, God points out Job to Satan and says, look at Job. Look at how much he loves me. Look at the righteous life that he lives. And then Satan responds with maybe a little trash talk of his own and says, of course Job is going to bless you and love you and follow you because you've given Job everything you want. Job has a great life. Of course Job is going to bless you. Now, the rest of the story, if the story starts with Job having everything, the remainder of the story is Job losing everything. Job loses his family. Job loses his wealth. Job loses his land. Job loses his health. And eventually, as we sort of progress through the narrative of Job, as we move through Job's story, we watch as one tragedy after another befalls Job. And there comes a moment towards the end of Job's story where he has had enough. He is at his wits' end, and despite all kinds of advice and all kinds of suggestions. Job doesn't know where to go. And finally, in chapter 30, he cries out to God. This is Job chapter 30, beginning in verse 20. This is what it says. I cry out to you, O God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. This is Job and the depth of his pain, the depth of his emotion just erupting. Scripture continues, verse 21, you turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand, you attack me. You snatch me up and drive me before the wind. You toss me about in the storm. Now, this is a very small snippet of a large chapter where Job continuously, in the depths of his pain, cry out to God and essentially blame God for all of these things that have happened to him. He cries out to God. He basically says to God one of two things. Either you have abandoned me completely, or you are the source of all of this. Job is angry at God, and that anger comes out in these explosive words that he directs towards God. He's a man that has lost everything. And in the midst of that loss, in the midst of that pain, in the midst of that anger, cries out to God. Job's anger is on full display for the next several chapters. And in the midst of his anger, his friends and his wife approach him and they try to calm him down. They try to get him to relax. But Job is not having it. He's not having it. He's still in the midst of this explosive anger until God himself shows up and responds. Now, this is important because God is still there. He's still present despite Job just popping off at him. Job's anger does not drive God away. Instead, God draws near. And this is what God says. This is chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Essentially, who is this that is talking and doesn't really know what he's talking about? And this is God showing up and maybe doing a little bit of trash talk of his own. Verse 2. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. God responding to Job. Verse 4. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand who marked off its dimensions. Surely you know. Basically, you know everything else. So why don't you go ahead and tell me the rest of the story? God continues. Who stretched it? Who stretched a measuring line across it? Verse 6. On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone? Verse 7. While the morning stars sang together and all of the angels shouted for joy. Verse 8. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness. When I fixed limits for it, verse 10, and set its doors and bars in place. When I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt. Essentially this. Job cries out to God and basically tells God, you're doing this all wrong. And God shows up, as he always does. And he says to Job, basically, where were you? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Where were you when I put all of this together? Essentially saying to Job, you don't know what you're talking about. God in this moment is rebuking Job, there's no question. But in rebuking Job, what he is saying to Job is almost a comfort, because he's reminding Job, as he's reminding us, I'm bigger than all of this. I'm bigger than all of this. God reminds Job that no matter how bad it seems, that God is bigger than that, and that God is more present than that, and God is still with him. God doesn't just respond to Job. God restores Job. And everything that Job lost throughout this book, God ends up putting back together. Because that's what God does. Here in this moment where Job is losing his mind and his explosive and maybe justified anger is coming out towards God, God scoops him up. God reminds Job who he is. And then God restores Job. God is bigger than Job. God is bigger than us. God is near to Job. God is near to us. And God restores Job just as God is restoring us. Friends, thanks so much for being a part of Rhythm this morning. I hope you will continue to lean in, especially into your small groups. Some of you will have small groups in person. Others of you will meet on Zoom. Either way, I hope that you will be a part of the small group conversation to have other folks that you can share life with. That will happen at 4:30 this afternoon. Hope to see you there.